Hey guys, tonight, we drift softly into a world that most of us were never taught to see clearly. So settle back, loosen your shoulders, let your breathing slow just a little, and allow the noise of the modern day to fade into the distance, because tonight, we are traveling backward not into darkness, but into lamplight. What if everything you thought you knew about the so-called Dark Ages was wrong? What if the image of crude tools, stagnant minds, and centuries of ignorance was not just incomplete, but deeply misleading? Forget, for a moment, the caricature of medieval life as muddy, miserable, and technologically frozen. Forget the idea that innovation slept for 1,000 years between Rome and the Renaissance. Tonight, we are about to uncover a quieter story, one told not through grand revolutions, but through small, patient improvements, through gears turning softly in candlelit workshops, through water wheels murmuring in forested valleys, through plows slicing steadily through mist-shrouded fields at dawn. We're about to explore a hidden world of medieval ingenuity, a world of automated machines, advanced agricultural systems, precision timekeeping, clever sanitation, sophisticated architecture, and subtle technologies that reshaped daily life so completely that we barely notice their legacy. Today, you think the Middle Ages were technologically backward. Think again. This was a time when clockwork mechanisms began to imitate the movement of the heavens, when water-powered sawmills cut timber faster than human hands ever could, when farmers doubled crop yields through quiet mechanical insight rather than brute force. These were not crude stopgaps. They were groundbreaking advancements, refinements born of careful observation and practical need. And perhaps most surprising of all, they were everywhere. Imagine a world without reliable timekeeping. No clocks on walls. No schedules measured in minutes. Imagine farming without efficient tools. Cities without sanitation. Buildings without structural mathematics. It sounds primitive, doesn't it? Yet medieval people faced these challenges not with resignation, but with creativity. They developed personal hygiene innovations, advanced construction techniques, information systems, and labor-saving devices that allowed society not merely to survive, but to slowly, steadily improve. Tonight's story is not about kings or battles. It is about millers, monks, blacksmiths, carpenters, scribes, and anonymous tinkerers whose ideas quietly transformed how people lived, worked, ate, learned, and slept. So if you've ever been told that the Middle Ages were an age of ignorance, tonight, prepare to rest inside a different truth. Before we begin, if you enjoy long, calm journeys through overlooked history stories designed to soothe the mind, while gently expanding it, then take a moment to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment letting me know where you're listening from. Your support keeps these quiet histories alive. Now, as the world outside grows still, let us begin. The phrase "the Dark Ages" is a remarkably stubborn thing. It lingers in textbooks, in casual conversation, in jokes about medieval medicine and muddy streets. It suggests a 1,000-year night, where curiosity dimmed, progress stalled, and humanity waited impatiently for the Renaissance to switch the lights back on. But history, like sleep, is rarely that simple. The medieval world, particularly between the 9th and 14th centuries was not a pause in innovation. It was a slow, thoughtful reorientation, a time when knowledge shifted hands. Techniques adapted to new environments, and technologies evolved not for spectacle, but for survival. The truth is that medieval people were surrounded by machines, not roaring engines or glowing screens, of course, but devices that harnessed wind, water, gravity, leverage, heat, and time itself. These machines did not announce themselves loudly. They hummed, they creaked, they turned steadily, hour after hour, year after year. And because they worked so quietly, history almost forgot them. Take water power, for example. By the early Middle Ages, water wheels were not rare curiosities. They were the backbone of entire economies. Rivers and streams across Europe were carefully mapped, diverted, and disciplined. Channels were dug. Weirs were raised. Wheels were calibrated to seasonal flows. A single water mill could grind grain, full cloth, crush olives, tan leather, saw timber, and hammer iron, sometimes all in the same complex. The medieval mill was not a single-purpose tool. It was an industrial hub. Monastic orders, particularly the Cistercians, became masters of hydraulic engineering. Their abbeys were designed around water systems that powered workshops, flushed latrines, heated rooms, and regulated sanitation. These were not accidental conveniences. They were carefully engineered environments, and all of this unfolded in a world without blueprints as we know them. Knowledge was transmitted through apprenticeship, through observation, through hands that remembered what parchment could not always hold. This was a culture of practical intelligence. Consider agriculture the foundation of all pre-modern life. The medieval heavy plough was a technological marvel disguised as a simple tool. Unlike the light scratch ploughs of antiquity, it was designed to turn dense, wet northern soils. Its iron plowshare cut deep. Its mold board flipped earth efficiently. Its coulter sliced roots cleanly. Paired with the horse collar, another quiet revolution, this plow transformed food production. The collar shifted weight away from the horse's neck, allowing it to pull far heavier loads without choking. Fields expanded, yields increased, surpluses emerged, and surplus, as history whispers again and again, is where civilization begins to breathe. More food meant larger populations. Larger populations meant specialization. Specialization meant innovation. The medieval world did not lack intelligence. It lacked marketing. Even time itself was reimagined. Before mechanical clocks, time was fluid, measured by prayer, by daylight, by the ringing of bells. But monasteries demanded precision. Prayer hours mattered, labor, schedules mattered, order mattered. So artisans began building machines that could measure time. Without the sun, early mechanical clocks were not accurate by modern standards. They drifted, they faltered. They required constant adjustment. But they did something revolutionary. They divided the day into equal units. Regardless of season, time became abstract. And once time could be measured, it could be disciplined. Work rhythms changed. Urban life accelerated. Commerce adapted, eventually. The modern obsession with punctuality was born not in factories, but in monasteries and town squares. This pattern repeats throughout medieval innovation. A problem rises, a quiet solution emerges. Daily life shifts slowly, permanently, and because these changes were gradual, they escaped dramatic storytelling. No single inventor stood on a stage and claimed credit. Most medieval technologies evolved collaboratively, incrementally, anonymously. They belonged to communities rather than individuals, which makes them harder to celebrate, but no less profound. As shadows lengthen toward the edge of evening, it becomes clear that the Middle Ages were not a technological void. They were a bridge between ancient knowledge and modern systems, between muscle power and mechanization, between survival and structure. And tonight, as we continue deeper into this forgotten landscape, we will walk across that bridge together slowly, calmly, step by step. In the next part, we will descend into the everyday revolutions that shaped ordinary existence, the tools that warmed homes, cleaned bodies, clothed families, and turned labor into craft. For now, rest here for a moment. Let the water wheel keep turning. Let the bell fade into the distance. As the water wheel turns slowly in the half-light of early morning, we continue our journey. The river does not rush. It does not hurry history along. It simply moves patient, persistent, endlessly useful. And so did medieval innovation. If part 1 invited us to question the myth of the Dark Ages, part 2 gently leads us into the spaces where those forgotten technologies lived most fully. The fields, the homes, the workshops, and the quiet routines of ordinary people. Not kings, not crusades, but mornings, meals, work, warmth, and rest. This is where history truly happens. The day in a medieval village often began before sunrise. Mist clung to the low ground. The smell of damp earth lingered in the air. Somewhere, a rooster called not because it was symbolic, but because it was reliable. Time, in this world, was still tethered to nature, even as humans quietly learned how to shape it. The first great revolution of daily life was agricultural, and it unfolded so slowly that it felt almost natural. Fields expanded not through conquest, but through comprehension. Medieval farmers learned how their land behaved where water pooled, where frost lingered, where roots resisted. The heavy plow was not merely dragged across soil, it was tailored to it. In northern Europe, where clay-heavy earth clung stubbornly to wooden tools, the iron-tipped plow transformed resistance into rhythm. Its moldboard did more than cut, it rolled the earth over, burying weeds, exposing nutrients, preparing the ground for deeper roots. Plowing became not just easier, but smarter. And behind the plow walked another innovation that rarely receives its due: the system of open field farming. Fields were divided into strips, not because of inefficiency, but because of cooperation. Crop rotation, often a 3-field system, allowed soil to recover, nitrogen to return, and harvests to stabilize. One field rested, one field bore grain, one field fed legumes. The result was resilience. People ate more regularly. Famine did not disappear, but it loosened its grip. Life expectancy crept upward. Children survived winters that would have once claimed them. And all of this began with tools that looked deceptively simple. The horse collar deserves a moment of quiet admiration before it. Horses could not pull heavy loads efficiently. Straps pressed against their throats, restricting airflow. Oxen were used instead strong, slow, patient. But the padded collar redistributed weight across the horse's shoulders and chest, freeing its neck. The effect was immediate and transformative. Horses moved faster. They worked longer. They plowed more land in less time. And suddenly, distance shrank. Goods traveled farther. Messages moved quicker. Markets connected villages that once felt isolated. Innovation, once again, arrived without announcement. As the sun climbed higher, the sounds of labor replaced the hush of dawn. Hammers rang against metal. Looms thumped in steady cadence. Water splashed against turning wheels. These were not chaotic noises, but layered ones, each craft occupying its own rhythm, its own tempo within the day. Medieval workshops were not factories, but they were systems. Textile production, in particular, reveals how deeply medieval technology shaped daily life. Spinning wheels, introduced gradually across Europe, replaced the slow hand spindle. A single spinner could produce more thread with less strain. Wool became cloth more efficiently. Clothing became more accessible. Fulling mills often water-powered cleaned and thickened fabric by pounding it rhythmically in vats. What once required hours of manual labor now happened steadily, mechanically, and predictably. The result was not luxury. It was consistency. People owned more than one garment. Clothing lasted longer. Trade expanded. Entire towns organized themselves around cloth. Production dyeing, weaving, cutting, each step refined by accumulated knowledge. Metalworking followed a similar path. The medieval forge was not a primitive fire pit. It was a controlled environment. Bellows regulated oxygen flow. Charcoal burned hotter than raw wood. Iron blooms were hammered, folded, and reheated to improve strength. Blacksmiths understood stress, fatigue, and balance, not in equations, but in muscle memory. They crafted plowshares that resisted cracking, nails that held fast, hinges that swung smoothly year after year. And while swords capture our imagination, it was tools, hoes, sickles, axes, chisels that truly defined medieval metallurgy. The quiet triumph of iron was not warfare, it was durability. As afternoon softened into evening, attention turned inward to the home. Here, too, medieval innovation quietly transformed existence. Early medieval houses often featured a central hearth with smoke escaping through holes in the roof. Effective, yes, but inefficient and dangerous. Over time, chimneys emerged as architectural solutions. Smoke was drawn upward and out. Rooms became breathable. Upper floors became livable. Heat could be directed, space could be divided. This changed everything. Homes grew taller. Privacy increased. Cooking became safer. Sleeping spaces separated from livestock. The medieval house evolved from shelter into structure. Even sanitation so often mocks or meaningful progress. In towns with Roman legacies, old sewer systems were maintained and adapted. In monasteries, latrines were engineered with flowing water beneath them, flushing waste away continuously. Some complexes featured running water directed specifically for hygiene. Cleanliness was not absent. It was contextual. Soap made from animal fat and ash was widely used. Bathhouses existed in many cities. Personal grooming tools, combs, tweezers, razors were common finds in archaeological digs. The medieval body was not ignored. It was managed. And then there was light. Candles made from tallow or beeswax extended productive hours into the evening. Oil lamps glowed softly in homes and workshops. Glass windows small, imperfect, but present filtered daylight rather than excluding it entirely. Glassmaking itself advanced steadily. Techniques refined in places like Venice, and the Islamic world filtered into Europe, bringing clearer panes, decorative vessels, and eventually lenses. Eyeglasses, appearing in the late 13th century, changed the trajectory of learning. Older scribes could read longer. Scholars worked deeper into life. Knowledge stayed active instead of retiring with failing eyesight. A simple curve of glass extended human capability. Once again, no fanfare, just improvement, as shadows lengthen toward the edge of night. Medieval life settles into a quieter phase. The mill continues turning, even after dark. The clock in the town square still imperfect. Still drifting marks the hours with solemn weight. Bells ring, not to command, but to coordinate. And in this rhythm, something profound becomes clear. Medieval technology was not about domination over nature. It was about negotiation with it. Water was guided, not conquered. Wind was borrowed, not trapped. Soil was respected, not exhausted. These innovations endured because they worked with the world as it was. They shaped daily life not through disruption, but through adaptation. And as we prepare to move deeper into the realm of precision, into timekeeping, measurement, and the medieval mastery of space, let the quiet confidence of these everyday revolutions linger. The Middle Ages did not stumble blindly through history. They walked steadily. They learned patiently. They built carefully. Rest here for a moment. Let the forge cool. Let the hearth glow low. Let the river keep its watch. As night settles gently over the medieval world, the sounds of labor soften. The forge grows quiet. The fields rest. Candles flicker behind thick walls. And above it all, the sky opens vast, patient, and endlessly observed. It is here, beneath the turning stars, that medieval innovation becomes especially subtle. Because while much of medieval technology shaped the body, how people ate, worked, and slept, another current of invention shaped the mind. This was the slow mastery of time, space, and measurement. A world where humans began to describe reality not only through experience, but through systems. And once again, the changes arrived quietly. For most of human history, time had been elastic. Morning was when the light returned. Evening was when it faded. Seasons mattered more than hours. A task took as long as it took, and that was enough. But medieval life, especially communal life, began to demand greater precision. Monasteries were among the first places where time truly mattered. Prayer was structured. Hours were sacred. The rule of Saint Benedict divided the day into fixed intervals, regardless of the season. Night prayers, dawn prayers, midday prayers, evening prayers. To live in this rhythm required something more reliable than the sun. Early solutions were simple. Water clocks, candle clocks. marked hourglasses each had limitations. Water froze, candles burned unevenly, sand clogged. But they represented something new, a desire to regulate time mechanically. And from that desire emerged one of the medieval world's most transformative inventions, the mechanical clock. These early clocks were not elegant by modern standards. They were heavy, loud, and imprecise, driven by falling weights and regulated by escapement mechanisms that released energy in controlled increments. They ticked and clacked with audible insistence. They were less about accuracy and more about regularity. For the first time, hours were equal winter or summer, light or dark. Time became abstract, divisible, and communal. Bells rang not because the sun said so, but because a machine decided it was time. This altered daily life in ways that are difficult to overstate. Markets opened and closed more predictably. Workdays acquired structure. Towns synchronized activity. Even personal identity shifted. People began to think of themselves as early or late, punctual or delayed. The modern world's obsession with timekeeping did not begin in factories. It began in towers and cloisters, as the clock measured hours. Medieval minds also turned toward measuring space. Travel in the medieval world was slow, but it was not blind. Pilgrims crossed continents. Merchants navigated rivers and seas. Envoys carried messages between distant courts. To do this reliably required more than memory, it required tools. Cartography advanced gradually, blending inherited Roman knowledge with lived experience. Medieval maps were not meant to be perfectly scaled. They were meant to be useful. Portolan charts detailed nautical maps emerged along Mediterranean trade routes. They marked coastlines, harbors, and prevailing winds with remarkable accuracy. Mariners relied on them to move safely through complex waters. The magnetic compass, arriving in Europe by the 12th century, further transformed navigation. No longer dependent solely on stars or shorelines, sailors could orient themselves even in fog or darkness. This was not merely technological progress. It was psychological freedom. The world became navigable in ways it never had before. Above the earth, medieval scholars studied the heavens with equal care. Astronomy was not separate from daily life. It guided agriculture, religious observance, and medicine. The positions of stars and planets were believed to influence everything from planting schedules to personal temperament. Instruments like the astrolabe embodied this union of science and symbolism. The astrolabe was a handheld universe, a brass disc engraved with the movements of celestial bodies. With it, users could determine time, latitude, prayer hours, and the position of the sun or stars. It was complex, precise, and astonishingly versatile, far from being ignorant of the cosmos. Medieval thinkers mapped it intimately. They inherited Greek texts, expanded Arabic scholarship, and layered observation upon observation. Universities became centers for this synthesis, founded in cities like Bologna, Paris, and Oxford. Medieval universities formalized learning. They standardized curricula. They preserved texts. They trained scholars who could debate, calculate, and teach across generations. Knowledge became institutional, and with institutions came tools. Paper introduced to Europe via Islamic transmission revolutionized record keeping, cheaper and more flexible than parchment. It allowed for broader documentation, accounts, letters, diagrams. Drafts all multiplied. Information moved faster. Memory externalized itself. The medieval world, often imagined as forgetful, became increasingly archival. Architecture, too, became a science. Cathedrals were not built by intuition alone. They were mathematical expressions in stone. The development of ribbed vaults distributed weight efficiently. Flying buttresses redirected lateral forces outward, allowing walls to rise higher and windows to grow larger. Light flooded sacred spaces not by accident, but by calculation. Builders understood geometry, stress, and load-bearing principles deeply, even if they expressed them through rule of thumb rather than formula. A cathedral took decades, sometimes centuries, to complete. It was built by generations who trusted inherited knowledge and future hands. This was innovation stretched across time. As midnight deepens, the medieval world continues to measure itself quietly, steadily. Time is counted, space is charted, the heavens are mapped, information is stored. Structures rise with mathematical grace. None of this feels dramatic in the moment. No single night announces a revolution. But when viewed together, these innovations reveal a society deeply engaged with understanding its world. The Middle Ages did not reject reason. They practiced it patiently. And as we prepare to move into the realm of knowledge itself, into literacy, learning, and the technologies that carried ideas, across centuries, let the measured ticking of the clock linger in your thoughts. Each second, falling like a grain of sand, each hour gently marked, each innovation quietly reshaping life. Rest. Here now. Lecture halls echoed with voices passing Aristotle, Galen, Avicenna. Logic was sharpened, definitions refined, concepts tested against reality. And all of this required technology, not flashy, but essential. Bookstands allowed multiple volumes to be consulted at once. Reading desks angled pages to reduce strain. Chains secured valuable manuscripts while keeping them accessible. Libraries were designed as systems. Eyeglasses, too, quietly extended intellectual life. Convex lenses corrected far-sightedness, allowing aging scholars to continue reading. Wisdom no longer retired. When vision dimmed, aging minds stayed productive. Literacy also seeped into commerce. Merchants used written contracts. Account books tracked debts and credits. Double-entry bookkeeping developed in late medieval Italy, introduced balance, accountability, and foresight. Numbers told stories. Arabic numerals, more efficient than Roman ones, spread gradually. Calculation became faster. Errors decreased. Complex transactions became manageable. Commerce scaled, and with scaling came trust. Trust built not only on reputation, but on records. Even memory itself was technological. Medieval thinkers developed elaborate mnemonic systems, mental architectures, where ideas were placed in imagined rooms, along imagined paths. These techniques allowed vast amounts of information to be retained and recalled. The mind became a structured space. Knowledge was not merely stored, it was navigated. As dawn approaches, the candle burns low beside an open book. A monk stretches cramped fingers. A student rubs tired eyes. A merchant closes a ledger with quiet satisfaction. None of them believe they are living in a dark age. They are surrounded by tools that help them remember, calculate, teach, and learn. Their world is not ignorant, it is intensely curious. And that curiosity, disciplined by systems and sustained by humble technologies, will carry ideas forward into centuries yet unborn. As we prepare to explore how medieval innovation moved outward through trade, textiles, and interconnected economies, let the image of the turning page linger. History does not always shout, sometimes it whispers and waits for someone to listen. Rest here a while. As the last bells of midnight fade into silence, another sound takes their place. It is softer than iron on iron, quieter than the turning of a mill wheel. It is the sound of a page being turned. In the medieval world, knowledge did not explode into existence. It accumulated slowly, carefully, almost reverently. And yet, this quiet accumulation would become one of the most powerful technologies of all. Because ideas, once preserved, can outlive stone. To understand the medieval knowledge economy, we must first let go of a modern assumption that literacy is either present or absent. In the Middle Ages, literacy was layered. It existed in degrees, across professions, across genders, across regions. Many people could not read Latin, but could read symbols. Many could not write fluently, but could sign names. Many could not access books, but could listen attentively, repeatedly, deeply. Knowledge was not locked away. It was shared differently. Monasteries served as the primary engines of preservation. In scriptoria, quiet rooms filled with slanted desks and filtered light, scribes copied texts by hand. This was not mindless labor. It was interpretation. Errors were corrected, margins filled with commentary, diagrams refined. The act of copying was an act of understanding. Ink itself was a technology, made from oak galls, iron salts, and careful ratios. It bonded chemically with parchment. Pages written 1,000 years ago remain legible today because medieval chemists, though, they would not have used that word, understood permanence. The quill pen, flexible and responsive, allowed for varied pressure and expression. Scripts evolved for clarity and speed. Carolingian, minuscule, with its clean letter forms and spacing, became the ancestor of modern lowercase letters. Even our alphabet carries medieval fingerprints. Then came paper. Arriving in Europe through Islamic Spain and Sicily, paper transformed the economics of thought. Unlike parchment, which required animal skins, paper could be produced in volume. Linen rags were pulped, pressed, dried, and cut. Paper mills sprang up along rivers, powered by water wheels that hammered fibers into slurry. Once again, water did the work. The effect was immediate. More paper meant more notes, more drafts, more correspondence. Ideas could be revised instead of memorized. Mistakes could be crossed out instead of carried forever. This changed how people thought. Scholars began working through problems on the page. Diagrams multiplied. Tables organized information. Lists emerged not as modern efficiency tools, but as medieval innovations in clarity. The written word became a workshop. Universities accelerated this transformation. Unlike monasteries, which emphasized preservation, universities emphasized debate. Students gathered not to copy texts silently, but to argue them aloud. Lectures were interactive. Questions mattered. Knowledge was not fixed. It was contested. As dawn finally breaks, pale and unhurried, it does not rise over a silent world. Somewhere, a loom is already in motion. Somewhere else, a merchant's cart creaks onto a long road. Far beyond the horizon, sails catch a cautious wind. The medieval world is waking not in isolation, but in connection. Because one of the most overlooked innovations of the Middle Ages was not a single device or machine, but a system, the slow weaving together of local lives into vast networks of trade, exchange, and shared technique. These networks were held together not by empires alone, but by threads, literal ones. Textiles were the bloodstream of the medieval economy. Cloth was not merely worn. It was counted, taxed, traded, stored, pledged, and inherited. It functioned as wealth in motion, portable and practical, and producing it required an astonishing degree of technological coordination. Wool began its journey on the backs of sheep-grazing hillsides shaped by generations of careful pasture management. Breeding practices favored longer fibers. Seasonal shearing followed rhythms, refined through experience. Once shorn, wool passed through a series of tools, combs, carders, spindles. Wheels each optimized over centuries. The spinning wheel, in particular, transformed labor. A single spinner could produce thread far faster than before, freeing time and energy for other work. Weaving looms grew more sophisticated. Horizontal looms allowed greater width and consistency. Treadles freed the weaver's hands, allowing feet to control warp threads while fingers guided the weft. The body itself became part of the machine. Dyeing introduced chemistry into daily life. Plants, insects, minerals each yielded color through precise preparation. Mordants fixed hues to fibers. Temperature, timing, and water quality mattered. This was experimental science, practiced without laboratories. The result was cloth that traveled. Trade routes stitched regions together. Flemish wool became Italian cloth. English fleece reached Mediterranean ports. Silk traveled from the east along routes maintained not only by caravans, but by shared knowledge of terrain, weather, and supply. Ports functioned as technological ecosystems. Cranes lifted cargo using counterweights and pulleys. Warehouses standardized storage. Dockyards refined shipbuilding techniques that balanced strength, speed, and capacity. Medieval ships were marvels of compromise adapted to shallow rivers. Rough seas, unpredictable winds. Lateen sails allowed tacking against the wind. Hull designs evolved to maximize cargo while minimizing drag. Navigation, again, relied on tools, compasses, charts, stars. Commerce moved not blindly, but deliberately. Markets transformed towns. Weekly markets and annual fairs became focal points of exchange. Temporary structures appeared. Scales weighed goods. Measures standardized volume and length. Measurement itself was a technology. Authorities enforced consistency not out of obsession, but necessity. Trade demanded trust. Trust required predictability. Coins circulated, but barter remained common. Value was fluid, negotiated, contextual, and yet, over time, systems stabilized. Guilds emerged not merely as labor organizations, but as custodians of knowledge. They regulated training, preserved techniques, enforced quality. An apprentice learned not just how to make something, but how to make it well. This slowed innovation in some ways, but deepened it in others. Techniques were refined, not reinvented. Errors were remembered. Improvements persisted. Craft became culture. Trade also moved ideas. Paper traveled. Glass techniques spread. Metallurgical insights crossed borders. A watermill design refined in one valley appeared years later in another. Innovation diffused through contact. The medieval world was not static. It was conversational. Even failure traveled. Collapsed bridges informed better ones. Sunk ships improved hulls. Poor harvests refined tools. Knowledge moved at the speed of trust. As the sun climbs higher, roads fill with motion. Pilgrims walk toward shrines, carrying not only faith but stories. Traders haggle in multiple languages. Messengers ride with sealed letters, wax impressions pressed by signet rings. Another quiet technology of authentication. Seals mattered. Identity mattered. A mark in wax could bind agreements across distance. Authority could travel without the person. Vista shaped daily life. By afternoon, the interconnected medieval world hums. No single individual perceives the whole system. Each knows only their part. The shepherd tends sheep. The spinner turns wool to thread. The weaver works the loom. The dyer watches color bloom. The merchant counts bolts of cloth. The sailor trims sails. And yet, together, they form something astonishingly complex. This is technology as ecology. Not machines replacing humans, but machines extending them. Not disruption, but integration. The Middle Ages did not invent globalization, but they rehearsed it. As evening approaches once more, and trade goods are packed away, the roads quiet again, but the threads remain. And as we prepare to descend into the forge, the fire, and the hidden mastery of medieval materials, iron, steel, glass, and heat, let the image of these unseen connections rest with you. Every object carried a story. Every tool carried knowledge. Every exchange reshaped the world gently. Rest now. As evening settles once more, the world narrows, the road empties, the market stalls fall silent, and somewhere, behind thick stone walls, or beneath a simple wooden roof, a fire is coaxed back to life. This is the forge. Not dramatic, not theatrical, just hot, patient, and essential. If water was the quiet muscle of the medieval world, fire was its hidden intelligence. Because within flame, medieval people learned how to persuade matter to change its nature. The medieval forge was not chaos. It was control. Charcoal, not raw wood, was the fuel of choice. Carefully produced in earthen mounds, charcoal burned hotter and cleaner, allowing smiths to reach temperatures necessary for working iron effectively. Bellows mattered. These were not crude sacs of air, but calibrated devices, foot-operated, sometimes water-powered. Bellows delivered oxygen in measured pulses. More air meant more heat. Less air meant restraint. The smith listened to the fire. Metal color told stories dull red, bright orange. Yellow-white. Each hue signaled a specific temperature. Each temperature permitted a different action: bending, welding, hardening. This knowledge was not written. It was embodied. A blacksmith learned through repetition, through burned hands and failed attempts. And once learned, the knowledge lasted a lifetime. Iron itself was transformed by medieval insight. Early medieval iron came from bloomery furnaces, producing spongy masses of metal mixed with slag. These brooms had to be hammered repeatedly to remove impurities. The process strengthened the metal, aligning its internal structure. Over time, smiths discovered how carbon content affected hardness. Low carbon iron was soft and malleable. High carbon steel could hold an edge but risked brittleness. The solution was balance. Pattern welding, folding, and twisting layers of iron and steel produced blades and tools that combined flexibility with strength. Though famous for swords, the technique mattered far more for plowshares, axes, chisels, and knives. Tools that endured mattered more than weapons that glittered. Heat was also mastered beyond metal. Glassmaking advanced steadily through the medieval period. Furnaces reached higher, more consistent temperatures. Silica, soda, and lime were combined in precise ratios. Glass was no longer just translucent, it became clearer. Windows admitted more light. Bottles preserved liquids. Lenses bent vision itself. The ability to control heat changed architecture too. Lime kilns produced mortar that set stronger and lasted longer. Bricks were fired to uniformity. Tiles replaced thatch in wealthier regions, reducing fire risk and improving insulation. Fire reshaped cities. Ceramics, often overlooked, reveal another layer of medieval innovation. Potters refined glazes using metallic oxides. Lead glazes produced glossy surfaces that sealed porous clay. Vessels became more hygienic. Food lasted longer. Storage improved. Kilns were redesigned to regulate airflow and temperature. Pots fired evenly. Cracks decreased. Waste declined. Efficiency emerged not from speed, but from understanding. Even food was transformed by fire. Bread ovens became communal technologies. Entire villages shared large ovens, carefully heated and timed. Baking schedules were coordinated. Heat was conserved. Brewing relied on controlled boiling. Ale and beer was safer than water in many regions. Hops, gradually adopted, preserved flavor and extended shelf life. Fire made calories reliable. As the forge quiets and embers glow low, something becomes clear. Medieval people were not merely users of fire. They were students of it. They observed. They adjusted. They passed knowledge forward. No manuals, no patterns, just continuity. And from this continuity came a material culture sturdy enough to support growth, trade, and thought. As we move next into the soft sounds of water, once more into mills, channels, and the whispering power that ran beneath medieval life, let the forge's warmth linger. Fire taught transformation. Water taught persistence. Rest here. Listen closely now. Before the hammer strikes, before the bell rings, before the clock counts another hour, there is water. Always water. It slips through valleys, gathers in streams, slows into rivers, and waits patiently for human attention. And in the medieval world, people learned not to fight this patience, but to borrow from it. If fire taught transformation, water taught endurance. The medieval water mill was not a single invention. It was a philosophy. To build a mill was to enter into conversation with the landscape. A river could not simply be commanded. It had to be studied its seasonal moods, its floods, its droughts, its quiet strength. Millers learned to read water the way sailors read wind. Channels were dug with gentle slopes, just steep enough to guide flow without erosion. Weirs raised water levels without stopping movement. Gates regulated pressure. Wheels were sized to the stream, not the other way around. There were undershot wheels, kissed by flowing water, overshot wheels, fed from above with gravity's help, breastshot wheels, balanced between force and control. Each design reflected local knowledge, and each turned steadily, hour after hour, day after day, doing work that would have exhausted human bodies. Grain milling was only the beginning. Once medieval engineers realized that rotational motion could be transferred, multiplied, and redirected, water power escaped the millstone. Cams lifted hammers, gears shifted direction, shafts transmitted energy across rooms. Fulling mills pounded cloth clean and dense. Sawmills sliced timber into uniform planks. Forge mills drove bellows and trip hammers. Paper mills mashed fibers into pulp. Entire industries leaned into the river. A single stream could power an economy. Monasteries, once again, stand out. Cistercian abbeys were masterpieces of hydraulic planning. Built in remote valleys, they reshaped watercourses to serve every aspect of daily life. Water-powered mills, water-flushed latrines, water-supplied kitchens, water-irrigated gardens, water-regulated temperature. Waste was carried away. Clean water flowed in. Disease was reduced, not eliminated, but managed. This was environmental engineering centuries before the term existed. And it was done quietly. Urban centers followed. Cities grew around rivers not only for transport, but for power. Mill rights were fiercely guarded. Legal disputes over water usage filled medieval courts. Because water was wealth. A mill could mean prosperity or famine. It could anchor a town. It could dictate settlement patterns for generations. Even politics bent to hydraulics. What makes medieval water power so remarkable is not just its scale, but its sustainability. These systems ran for centuries. Some still exist. Their foundations unchanged. They required maintenance, yes, but not reinvention. They worked because they respected limits. No fuel to exhaust, no smoke to choke cities, no machines outrunning their context. Water flowed, wheels turned, life continued. As evening draws near once more, the mill slows but does not stop. It turns in moonlight. It hums beneath stars. It works while people sleep. And in that gentle persistence lies a lesson the medieval world understood deeply. Progress does not need to be loud. Power does not need to be violent. Technology does not need to announce itself to matter. Sometimes it simply flows. As we prepare to step away from motion and into stillness, into the domestic spaces where medieval people rested, healed, and dreamed, let the sound of water fade slowly from your thoughts. Let it become a memory, a rhythm, a reassurance, The water fades into the distance now, not because it has stopped flowing, but because walls have closed around us, thick ones, stone and timber, warmed by bodies, by embers, by time. This is the medieval home, not the drafty caricature of popular imagination, but a living structure, one that changed, slowly and thoughtfully, as people learned how to make life inside it gentler. Because comfort, too, is a technology. Early medieval dwellings were simple, but they were not careless. Homes were oriented to catch morning light and avoid prevailing winds. Walls were thick, not for defense alone, but for insulation. Roofs sloped steeply to shed rain and snow. Materials mattered. Wattle and dog breathed with the seasons. Stone held warmth. Timber flexed under stress. Each choice reflected local climate and available resources. And over time, these choices refined themselves. The hearth was the heart of the home. At first, it sat centrally, smoke escaping through a hole. In the roof, this worked but imperfectly. Smoke stung eyes, soot-coated beams. Heat wandered. The introduction of chimneys changed everything. Smoke could now be guided upward and out. Fireplaces were built into walls. Heat became directional. Rooms separated. Upper floors became usable. Privacy emerged. Cooking improved. Sleeping improved. Domestic space gained layers. The chimney did not just remove smoke, it reorganized life. Furniture followed. Benches gave way to chairs. Chests stored clothing, tools, documents. Tables became more common, transforming meals into shared rituals rather than hurried necessities. Beds were raised off the floor, stuffed with straw or feathers, enclosed by curtains that trapped warmth and offered seclusion. Sleep itself improved, and with better sleep came better health, clearer thought, steadier labor. Light, always precious, was managed carefully. Candles varied by wealth tallow for most, beeswax for the fortunate. Oil lamps burned steadily. Windows, though small, admitted daylight through horn. Oiled cloth or glass. Glass, imperfect but luminous, softened the boundary between inside and out. Light extended evenings. Evenings extended conversation. Conversation extended culture. Hygiene lived here too. Contrary to myth, medieval people washed regularly. Basins stood near doors. Towels were common. Soap was made and traded. Combs and grooming tools filled households. Bathing occurred at home when possible, and in public bathhouses when available. These were social spaces as much as hygienic ones. Cleanliness was contextual, but intentional. Food storage improved steadily. Pantries were designed to stay cool. Ceramic vessels sealed grain from pests. Smoke cured meat. Salt preserved fish. Root cellars moderated temperature naturally. The medieval kitchen was an exercise in thermodynamics and microbiology practiced without theory. Guided by observation, waste, too, was managed. Chamber pots emptied into pits or flowing water. Compost returned nutrients to soil. Even refuse had a cycle. Nothing was truly disposable. As night deepens, the medieval home settles. Fire dims, candles gutter. Wind brushes walls without entering. Inside, the space holds, and in this, holding in warmth, light, rest, And routine we see another quiet truth. Medieval innovation was not obsessed with conquest or spectacle. It was obsessed with living better, increment by increment, generation by generation. As we prepare to step outward once more into medicine, healing, and the technologies that guarded fragile bodies against an uncertain world, let the hush of this room remain with you. The fire is safe. The door is closed. The night can wait.
Time keeps moving like a quiet river. Civilization rise and them they fell. But wisdom never die. It travels from one land to another land, just like the wind carries the scent of flowers across fields. After the great invention of mechanics, the world became busy. People worked in factories, built cities of glass and stone, and scraped and searched from progress. But deep inside, the human heart still wanted peace, love, and meaning, the same things that early humans once wanted around their compare. The age of discovery and the power. In this new age, people began to travel across the ocean. They touched every corner of the world. Some came as traders, others as conquerors. Many stories of hope and pain began in the in this time. In Asia, old empire watched the new world grow stone. In Africa, proud kingdom that had trade, gold and the salt for century faced powerful outside who wanted to control them. In the Americas, new nations were born. Some peace, some after war. The world became connected like never before. The world became connected like never before. Ships carried goods, letters, soldier, and dream. The earth began to feel smaller yet full of bigger change. The age of change in thought. While mechanism made noise in factories, quiet thinkers worked in libraries. They asked brave questions about freedom, write about truth. In Europe, writers spoke about justice and equality. They said every person has value. They believed that power should not belong only to kings or the rich, but to everyone. People began to dream of democracy, democracy, a new way of rule where every voice could be heard. Resolves began to shake the old world. In France, people rose up shouting for liberty. In America, people fought for independence across the world. A new idea grew strong. No one should live in chains. But freedom did not come for all. Many learned, still, and suffered under foreign rule. Many people still worked without choice. The world seemed to take one step forward and one step back. Yet, slowly, very slowly, the light of awareness kept growing. In the 1800s and 1900s, knowledge grew faster than ever. New mechanisms changed everything: the steam engine, the telegraph, the telephone, and the electric light. Science began to explain the mysteries of nature. People learned that the earth was very old and that life had evolved over millions of years. Charles Darwin spoke about evolution, and Einstein Einstein slowed that space and time were woven together. These were not just discoveries; they were new way to see the universe and ourselves. While science grew, art and music also bloomed. Writers like Tolstoy, Tagore, and Dekchins wrote simple stories about human life, love, struggle, and kindness. Patience captured beauty on canvas. Musicians gave the world songs that touched the soul. Civilization became not just about power, but about creativity and expansion. But the 20th century was not only light, it also brought deep shadows. Two great wars shook the world like storm. National fight for land, pride, and silence. The dreams of space turned into smoke, and humanity learned again how fragile life is. When the first war ended, there was hope for peace, but not for long. The second war came bigger and darker. New weapons destroyed cities in seconds. Pain covered in earth. After the wars ended, people come together and said, "Never again." They formed the United Nations to project peace, justice, and human. The age of rebuilding. After so much suffering, nation began to heal. Broken cities were rebuilt. Children went to school again. Farmer planted new seeds. Artists and scientists start creating again. In India, freedom finally came after a long peaceful struggle led by Mahatma Gandhi, whose voice of non-violence touched the world. In Africa and Asia, one by one, nations found their one strength and because became free. New centuries were born carrying both hope and responsibility. Slowly, humanity began to understand that every nation is a part of the same earth family. The digital age. As time moved into the late 1900s and early 200s, something new began: the age of connection. Computer appeared same at first but growing fast. The then came the internet and suddenly the world became one big village again, just like in the beginning when people sat around one fire and share stories. Now a speakers now a person in one corner of the earth could speak to another across oceans in seconds. Knowledge flowed like water, freely and endlessly. This was history repeating itself. Humans, con- humans connecting, learning, and sharing. Yet, with his new power came new challenges. Loneliness confuse and greed. The question returned: what does progress mean if peace is for lost? A lesson of time. When a long back across all time, from the canvas to the stars, one truth shines like the sun. Human life is short, but it is but its story is long. Empire rise and fall, leaders come and go, but goodness, kindness, and truth never die. Every person who help other, every hand, every hand that beauty instead of destroy become a white hero of history. And maybe that is the real meaning of world history. Not just the story of kings, war, and invention, but the story of one human heart type to understand another. A centuries turn and the world keep and charping, char- changing. One message stays clear.